So let's recap shin splints, in particular posterior shin splints. So wanted to go over what muscle is mainly involved here, and as your posterior tibialis muscle. So when you see this, and we'll add on layers of muscle in a minute, just know that that is really deep behind all your calf muscles, comes down, goes behind your ankle bone, and it is a big key factor in your arch support of your foot. So when we look at other layers of muscle, let's go back. So these muscles move your toes, okay? So that does all of your smaller toes. This muscle does your big toe, okay? So if you're already thinking it's deep, I mean, it is very deep, but we'll add on the calf muscles on top. This right here is your soleus. So it is the calf muscle that most people forget about when they're stretching. It does not cross the knee joint here. So to stretch this guy, that's the one where you're bending your knee forward while you're keeping your heel on the ground. And then when you add on the gastroc, that's the one that we think about. It helps with bending the knee. It obviously is the main muscle that pushes your foot down that you're thinking of when you do calf raises and you see this one pop out. So when we are thinking shin splints and what's really happening and why they hurt where they do, so that is really, really deep, and the connective part of that muscle that actually attaches to the bone spans the length of your shin bone almost, right? So when you feel that pain right there on that inside part of your bone, it's not necessarily in the actual muscle, it's where that muscle has been pulling on that bone and it gets the bone really, really tender. So what I wanted to go over is things that we're going to be working on. We're going to be working on hip strength. Let me scroll down here. Because if you are thinking about repetitive nature of running, when most people get shin splints, we'll add on all the muscle layers. If you do not have adequate strength in your hip, every time you heel strike, this hip, let me actually zoom out just a little bit. Every time you heel strike or just weight bear onto your foot, if you do not have a lot of hip strength up here in a sense of repetitive and functional hip strength, you can be strong, but if it's not strong in the motion you're doing, there will be issues there. So if this hip then drops a little bit every time you take a step, when that drops, it's going to put a little bit more pressure on the knee coming in, okay? When the pressure of the knee coming in, it's going to actually make your arch have a little bit of pressure coming down. Pronation is what that's called. When all of that happens, it puts more stress on the main muscle that comes to the arch, which is that posterior tib that we talked about. So it puts a lot of strain here, okay? When you get that pain there, then when you're running and it's constantly pulling on that bone, you start getting that pain that throbs down there in the shin, okay? Now there's other factors involved, but in general, this is the typical pattern that we see with shin splints, and that is why I end up giving you exercises to actually really work on strengthening the hip, to then stabilize the knee, to then take pressure off of the inner shin area. So what I want to do is I want to show you a little bit of the muscles from the hip really quick, and then we'll go back to the posterior tib, and then we'll be done with that. Okay. So in the hip, the main muscles that we are going to be working on strengthening are your glute med. Okay, so its job is to take the hip out to the side. Take the leg out to the side. Okay. Now the other thing that it does is it controls rotation of the hip. Okay. So when I have you stand and do a single leg squat, I'm watching for control of the knee. So when you are running, let me add on your other glute. When you're running, if you think of almost the reverse of that leg coming out to the side, think of it as like a stabilizer though. So when you're running, if this muscle does not kick in all the way, that is why it makes your hip actually drop, if that makes sense. Okay, we want to go back to your posterior tib actually here for a minute and just look at its job. All right, so it takes your foot in. So let's get a pretty zoomed in look at this. See where it's coming down, pulling right there on that arch. So you can see if I were to stabilize the rest of the foot, that would lift your arch. Okay, so that is why you're doing those arch raises as an exercise. Yep, and then when you're running, just think about if you're running, and this is, your foot takes impact, right? So if your arch is repeatedly dropping or you're rolling in much, it's going to put tension right up the whole length of that muscle. All right, hopefully that was helpful.